Hey guys, this is Craig from Appliance Analysts, and I'm here with James.
Hey.
We're going to talk about ovens today, pretty much everything to do with ovens, with things that can go wrong, how to fix them, our different recommendations if you're looking for a new model or if you're comparing different types and things like that. I hope you enjoy. Please let us know what you think in the comments, and be sure to check out some related articles that we'll leave in the description. So yeah, just to start in our usual way, James, when you get callouts for an oven issue, what's the most common sort of cause for concern or issue that people are experiencing the most?
Yeah, definitely the most common issue is just straight up not heating. Any kind of
Yeah.
oven, freestanding, built-in, definitely the most common issue. And most of the time it's usually the element. It's usually the most obvious. It can get a little more complicated just depending on what it is and kind of some of the nuances of the symptoms and stuff. But yeah, definitely not heating.
I actually, our oven actually broke the other day.
Ah,
Very, yeah, very timely. And it wasn't heating.
mhm.
So I ended up having to do just replacing the heating element, which maybe we can get into in more detail. But yeah, just to relate to you on this was it's like a fan, electric fan oven. So with a
Okay.
circular heating element.
Yes.
So thinking, oh, it's going to be a quick fix, just open up the front and pull out the screws.
Yeah.
But the screws on the heating element, they weren't like the bolts
Mhm.
weren't going from the interior out. They were, they'd been done in the reverse.
Oh yeah.
So it was like, had to pull the whole thing out, take the back off, open it up,
Oh yeah.
and then the screws were buried inside like the insulation.
Uh-huh.
So it was nice and fun.
Yeah, yeah, for the most part, a lot changing the heating element, whether it's a bake, a broil, or a convection element, is pretty simple usually. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of cases where you do have to get in through the back, and sometimes the hidden elements are even more difficult. So yeah, if you have an oven and the heating element goes out, hopefully it's one of the easy ones with two screws.
hmm
You could just pull out through the front. So
Yeah, fingers crossed. And if not, essentially you are just looking at, you don't really, obviously it's always best to have a diagram, but I guess you don't always need to. Just sort of where's the heat coming from? Can I access it? And then just getting in there and trying to pull it out. And hopefully you'll have a replacement just by looking at your model number and then searching that online.
yeah, and unfortunately, especially with more of your domestic models, a lot of the heating element part numbers are universal, which is good because that typically will bring down the price because you can get an aftermarket heating element that's just as good for, sometimes $20. It's a pretty inexpensive and usually easy repair to attempt yourself.
Yeah, and thankfully with the most mostly simplicity of ovens, it's generally one like the main thing that'll go wrong, I guess. I have a list of other fun stuff, but yeah, I guess that's the big one.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I'd just like to, before we dive into the troubleshooting and stuff, just like to get your opinion on gas versus electric ovens,
Mhm.
and if you tend to seek more callouts for one or the other, or if one, what would you personally prefer to have if you're choosing between the two?
If you're wanting something, especially maybe you have a lot of rental units and you want something that's going to be low maintenance and it's really not going to break a lot, gas is a really good choice. How they make the gas oven with the igniter and where the flame comes out, that whole process really hasn't changed in 30 years. So when you have components like that, there's a reason they haven't changed because they'll definitely withstand the test of time. So those are really good. Now with electric ovens, you have a heating element. With a gas oven, you have some type of igniter, and there's a few different kinds. The most common type of igniter is it's almost like a mini heating element. In gas ovens, that is the most common failure, but again, it is a cheap and easy repair to do, especially if you could find a video to know exactly where the screws come off. An experienced technician on most ovens could change an igniter in and out maybe 15 minutes. But yeah, they're definitely usually more low cost, low maintenance. Now, as far as like cooking preference, if you're one who really does a lot of baking and a lot of cooking, gas ovens are a little more volatile in their temperature fluctuation. So any oven, let's say you set it at 350, what it's going to do is once it reaches the target temperature, it's going to cut off power to the heating source, whether it's element or whether it's gas. Once that temperature falls below the set amount, so if you've got it set it at 350, usually once it hits about 330 or so, 330 to 340, it's going to turn that heat source back on. It's going to heat up, and so it's always cycling. With gas ovens, that cycle is a little more extreme. Obviously, you have fire, which is very hot, And so if you have an instant read thermometer in there, you'll notice it jump upwards of 450 degrees until it heats up the interior to 350 and then comes back down. They're still pretty good. It's not like they're going to burn your food every time, obviously. The technology's been out there for a while. But most bakers and cooks definitely prefer an electric oven but a gas cooktop. Those are dual fuel units, which are fantastic. They're great. I want one myself, but you can't really touch a dual fuel except if you're looking at spending over $2,000 or somewhere in the ballpark, like 2 to 4,000. Yeah, those are great.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And yeah, just to touch on the temperature fluctuations, it's something that I didn't know, and I was really surprised to find out. Just that it's if you set a temperature on your thermostat, it's not perfectly lining it up with the element and stuff. It's just getting there, turning off, on and on. And same with microwaves and everything like that.
Yeah,
A lot of people
dryers.
don't
Yeah.
know. Ah, yeah, yeah. I remember having a flatmate a few years ago and she was just fantastic at baking, but we had a gas oven, and I'm like, how are you doing that? Because
Yeah.
it's so tricky.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a skill that you develop over time for sure.
Yeah, yeah. So gas generally easier, lower maintenance, don't need to worry so much. But if you want your regular cake baker or something like that, electric generally the better.
Oh yeah.
More modern features on them, I think, typically as well.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And most electric ovens, especially in their like the mid to high range, usually do have a convection option, which I know a lot of people who cook a lot like to use because it's more even cooking. And most mid to high end ovens also have a hidden bake element, which allows even more so a more kind of calm, less variance in temperature fluctuation because the heating
Right.
is a lot slower, and the more expensive, the better it's made, the better it's insulated. You have a lot less temperature loss, and so you're definitely staying at your target temperature for a lot longer.
And good point to ask in terms of brands and different qualities and things like that. Would you have a sort of a general recommendation for anyone who might be shopping for a new oven in terms of, as you say, like what are the main differences in terms of is it mainly insulation? Is it features? What would you recommend?
Unlike some items like dishwashers, where the price you can get a $500 dishwasher or a $1,500 dishwasher, and they generally have the same parts inside. With an oven, as you go up in price, it really does increase in its capability and performance. So the more expensive it is, generally the better it's going to be built, the more insulated it's going to be, the seals are going to be good, the temperature fluctuation is going to be less, it's going to heat up faster, it's going to have a lot more features. So to kind of go through the spectrum, if you're, say your college student is moving out and is renting an apartment, it has no oven, obviously the most he's going to be cooking is probably, pizza bites or something like that. You don't really
Yeah.
need anything too technical for that. So I would recommend sticking with a low end, whether it's gas or electric, which they're really solid. I mean, they really don't break a whole lot. They're just very basic. So we're looking at Hot Point is a good one for a low end. That's inexpensive but does a good job. And then just kind of a basic low end Kenmore, Whirlpool, something like that. We're talking on sale for $350 sometimes. So really good option. When you start to get in mid-range, household, wife, kids, cook at least a few times a week. Mid-range, I would say stick with the Kenmore Maytag Whirlpool variety, and you're looking at anywhere from about 4 to about 700. They're more solid. They're fairly insulated. They do a good job. You can still make bake a great cake. And if you're really looking for something kind of on the higher end, you could always go to the extreme with something like Viking or something, but you're looking at 10 grand, which unless you got a business, I wouldn't really recommend that.
Mind blowing the prices that they go for.
Yeah, I mean, they're wonderful. I'd love to have one of those, but good grief. Very expensive. Really on the high end, Genair does a really good job. I really like the Genairs. They typically come kind of with that blue interior, so they're nice to look at. They've got great features. And even like the little things, like when you open the door, it's a really solid door. The hinge is real great. It opens real easy. It closes real easy. And just the temperature variance is really good on those. So Genair, I think, would probably be my pick for a higher end model. And you're looking at typically, if it's a built-in oven, somewhere in the ballpark of probably $850 to $1,200 If you're looking at a double oven, which is fantastic, especially for big gatherings, you're upwards of 2,000 plus range. But yeah, that kind of hits the whole spectrum.
Yeah, it was a fantastic breakdown. Really good to know and to keep in mind.
Hmm.
And just to keep going on the features there, I wanted to mention self-cleaning ovens and what you
Yes.
think of them and if they cause any complications.
Yeah.
I know, yeah, actually quite a lot of people who seem to search for like, is my self-cleaning oven enough? You know, do I need to do more, or should I even bother doing it? So I'd love to get your take on them.
Whenever customers ask me about that when I'm at home, the answer I usually have for them is, if you ask 100 technicians that work on ovens, how many of them use the self clean on their own oven, 100 are going to say no. You know, um,
Yeah.
it's a great concept, and there's
Yeah.
folks who do a self clean once a month for 20 years, never have any issues. What happens during a self clean, they're very effective, but any variance in what your owner's manual tells you to do to prepare for the self clean and how to use the self clean will result in some negative consequence. A lot of the ovens will tell you to remove the racks. So people who don't remove the racks will find afterwards they may be warped. They may not be able to support, big heavy things, because during a self clean it gets upwards of 700 degrees easily. If you don't remove any excess food, say you just spill a bunch of stuff in there and we'll just self clean it, you risk a fire. It can cause permanent damage on the lining, so it starts to chip off the paint and everything. The most common negative result of a self clean is that it blows basically the temperature fuse. Especially built-in ovens are kind of the culprits here. The freestanding ranges are a little bit better about being able to handle the heat. The main reason for that is they're not confined in a cabinet. So all of that heat is it's heating up your whole kitchen. When you have a built-in oven, that cabinet basically insulates it. So all of the electronics, all of the temperature fuses get so hot it pushes it to the extreme, and it will typically blow the temperature fuse. So a few things can happen after a self-clean. You may notice that it's totally off. There's no lights, there's no display. So it's blown the temperature fuse near the control board because it got so hot in that cavity that houses it. It blew the fuse to cut off the heat to protect the electronics. Sometimes it will blow the temperature fuse on the back of the unit, which cuts off power to the elements. So you'll still have lights, everything will be functioning, but it just won't heat. Sometimes those are resettable, which is nice because it just means you've got to pull it out, hit a button on the fuse, and it's good. Those are really the issues with the self-clean. What I have noticed in recent years is a lot of models are offering kind of what they call like a flex clean or like a steam clean, where you look in the oven and that the bottom, you've got a hidden bake element, so you just see the bottom cavity, but there's kind of an indention where you can actually pour some water in there and then activate the steam clean feature. That's great because it doesn't heat up as much. It requires a little more cleaning afterwards because you got to wipe everything out, but it's definitely a lot safer. So if you want a self-clean oven, and especially if it's a built-in oven, I would recommend trying to find something where you have that kind of steam clean option.
I think it's one of those features where, no one ever enjoys cleaning an oven, but sometimes the things marketers will tell you are good, too good to be true
Oh yeah,
in terms of tricky appliances to clean themselves.
yes.
Really, really good to keep in mind, and definitely a steam clean, like, cuts down on the elbow grease required. Just, yeah, we can never get away with cutting it out altogether.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure. So on the self-clean, so if you're just adamant, I'm going to self-clean, if it breaks, I'm going to have somebody come and fix it, it's worth it for me not having to actually get in there and scrub stuff. What really does help, of course, heat rises. And so if you have a built-in oven, there's almost always cabinets above the oven. And so what I've seen some people do, and it's kind of silly, but it's effective, is to take a big like hole saw drill bit and drill a bunch of holes in the cabinet above the oven, and then when you're doing a self-clean, open the doors, and then you're going to be able to have that heat vent out. You could even go to the another step and put a fan in there blowing the hot air out to help pull what's built up. So that's another option. $15 at the store to get a hole saw bit, cut a couple of holes. It's not pretty, but it might save you a service call.
Yeah, that's really smart, and essentially just, yeah, helping to circulate the air, keep it going.
Yeah.
Good way to do it, because I mean it is, some people may have situations where your back's not quite ready to bend over and start scrubbing the oven, but maybe the oven is starting to smell of grease or smoke or burning stuff. So
Hmm.
yeah, that's a really useful tip.
Yeah.
Are there any features that you would recommend looking for in an oven, other than, ideally having the bake element and things like that, but any sort of other things that are worth the money?
Having an oven with convection is convenient because it does cook faster, and it's almost like, I mean, essentially that's what an air fryer is, right? It's an element with a fan that blows hot air. So
Yeah.
if you learn to use that, you can have some pretty good and quick results.
Just to clarify, convection just meaning a fan oven, so it moves the air around to help with cooking.
Yeah, exactly, yeah, and it's typically a circular element, with a fan in the middle of it, kind of deal. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, um, uh, not all ovens have a feature where you can turn the light on, by pressing a button to see inside. That's really
Mm.
convenient to have, because if you want to check on your food, it'd probably be pretty annoying to have a flashlight shining in there trying to see. And every time you open your door to look at it and then shut it, you could easily lose 30 degrees or more. And so that's going
Hmm.
to cause
Hmm.
the element to come on again, and it could you'll have some uneven heating and stuff. So most of them nowadays do have an oven light that you can turn on, though. Some new features coming out that I haven't had the opportunity to test too much
Hmm.
is, I believe I've seen a Samsung, and I think I've seen an LG now, where they have a steam feature to cook your food. I don't, have you seen that
Okay.
or heard about it?
No, I've not. I've not.
Yeah,
That's an interesting one.
it's crazy. And the first time I didn't even know it existed, and I went to work on this oven, and it was a new Samsung oven. Samsung always looks real sleek and nice,
Hmm.
and I forget what the issue was, but as I'm looking at it and getting ready to pull it out of the wall, I see this compartment, and I'm like, what is that? And so I push on it, and this tray comes out where you put water, and I'm like, I have no idea what this is.
Uh,
So yeah, I start looking it up, and yeah, it's a steam feature. So you got a thing of vegetables, and you fill it up with water, or it might even be hooked to a water line. But yeah, you
mhm.
can steam, which is crazy.
It's pretty interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like it would be a quite an effort to get the oven up to temperature just to steam stuff. But I guess if you're batch cooking, doing a lot of veggies and things, that could work.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean,
Interesting. Yeah.
yeah, I don't know if it has like maybe a steam generator, like a separate element for the water, and it like shoots out steam or something. It's something I meant to look into and just totally forgot to. But yeah, pretty
Hmm.
crazy.
Hmm.
So if you want to
Yeah.
steam vegetables, that may be something to look at.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess otherwise it's I guess ovens are pretty simple really. It's just, you've got your heat, and you've hopefully got an accurate thermostat.
Mhm.
I guess you can have like a delay feature on it maybe. If you're wanting to plan ahead, put everything in there but have it come on, an hour before you get home, something like that.
Yeah, yeah, and that is nice, especially if you're busy and stuff, and you prep it in the morning, want it nice, hot, and ready whenever you get home. Yeah,
Hmm.
the delay feature is good, and I'm pretty sure that a lot of these ovens, just like with the washer and dryer, have where you can connect it and have the app, and so you can do some things remotely as well. And a lot of ovens, and they've actually had this for a long time, have a Sabbath mode. Have you ever seen that?
No, as in like a vacation mode or something, or like
So like a Sabbath mode is in you can set it to where during Sabbath, I guess where you fast or something. I'm not completely familiar
uh-huh.
with it. Where you can't use your oven.
All right.
Yeah, just to like remove that temptation to cook
Yeah.
something and eat it. Yeah, like for real, they have a
Uh,
Sabbath mode. It's pretty nuts.
yeah, very specific, yeah.
Yeah.
Just to help remove temptation, I guess. No, cool, good to know. But yeah, not quite like other appliances which generally feature like a water line that can have all these complex sort of features and things. I guess an oven, at the end of the day, it's an insulated box that gets very hot, and that's about it.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
for sure. And the as far as like the temperature fluctuation, there are some ovens. I know sometimes I give Samsung a hard time about being overly complicated. Samsung, they even have the ones where you can open the door, or you can press the button on the handle and open just half the door, and they have that tray you can slide in there to separate it, so you can make it two different oven temperatures kind of deal, or like
Oh.
and then
Mm.
like that flex kind of option. But the one thing about Samsung that I've noticed is they're one of the best brands about being close to set temperature. um,
Right.
If you have a 20-degree variance plus and minus, that's pretty much within range and tolerance. I've seen it even get to 25 plus or minus, which is okay. A lot of Samsungs, when I'm monitoring the temperature, I've seen them around 7-8 degrees variance plus or minus, so they're really good
Wow.
about being very accurate for temperature.
Right, yeah, so potentially a good recommendation for a baker,
Yeah.
someone that needs that perfect temperature for the perfect amount of time.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and it's definitely something that, not many people are in the position to measure different ovens and their variances and stuff, so
Oh yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
good to know.
Yep.
Shall we dive into some troubleshooting?
Yeah, I'll preface it with, as far
Yep.
as like, how they work and the simplicity of it. One thing to remember when you look in your oven and you see that metal probe sticking out, it may be 2 inches, it may be 5 inches, they vary in length.
Hmm.
That is your temperature sensor. So if you're cooking and you have something, say you have your pan in the very corner and it's blocking that temperature sensor, what you have to realize is now if you set it at 350, all of that heat that generates has to come up, heat up the pan underneath, come around before it actually hits the sensor to know what temperature it is. So it's always best to kind of know where that's at, and when you're cooking, to try to leave a path from the bottom to the top where the sensor is, just to get more of an accurate, reading on the temperature.
Yeah, makes sense. And I guess the further away your food is from the temperature, if it's at the top and you've got your food on the bottom, that could be a bigger variance than if it's right next to it, then it's going to be able to
Yeah,
look after it better.
yeah, exactly. The with the temperature sensor, most ovens have an option, and they usually tell you in the owner's manual of how to actually adjust the temperature of your oven. So that's the second biggest issue is, hey, it's burning my food, or the middle's not done, or this or that, or it takes a long time, it's burning my cookies, whatever. That is something that anyone can do to save a service call and troubleshoot. And we'll probably get into that a little bit as far as, because it does have in the owner's manual the process and how to get in the settings and change the temperature.
Yeah, we should definitely get into that. We want to make sure no one's cookies are getting burned out there. I'm more of a appliance researcher than a hands-on, but having messed around with a few different ovens, sometimes the door is super easy to come off, and sometimes it's like, you'd have to really go down a rabbit hole and research how to flick the hinges or whatever. Do you find that there's a few tricks that pretty much will always work, or can it, are some almost they pretty much are impossible to come off?
Some are impossible to come off, without really getting into it, to the point where even technicians won't take it off. They'll just bend over like a
Just deal with
ballerina
it.
to work inside, rather than
Yeah.
do that. Typically, you'll find that the lower end models are more likely where it doesn't come off. I guess it just costs a little more to make that extra little part to do it. I'm not sure. But yeah, the majority, like what you described, where you'll see at the base of the hinge, almost right where the hinge goes inside the cavity of the oven, there's little deals that'll flip around. And if you've never done it and you've had the oven for a few years, you really can't get it by hand. It almost feels like it doesn't flip around, and you may have to get a little screwdriver just to kind of motivate it to do that. Once it's flipped around, close the door. It won't close all the way. At that point, you'll be able to pull it off. Now, some of the newer ones will have some additional stuff on there. Like, I've noticed some of them have almost a cover over the hole that the hinge goes into. I don't know if it's like for aesthetic reasons. Sometimes you do have to take that off. I would say the newer and more expensive it is, if it's not just that basic kind of latch that you flip, you'll probably want to try to find a video or something on it. Because, like you said, you can definitely go down a rabbit hole in the wrong direction sometimes. So,
Yeah, it's like you get in there to try and like fix something or clean it, and then you end up half an hour later still fighting with the door.
oh,
Not
yeah.
even got started on the thing that you're there for.
Yes, yes.
What would you look at if the oven keeps tripping the homeowner's circuit breaker?
There can be a lot to it because with an oven, we're just referring to like the cavity, you're baking, you're broiling something. And then
Yep.
you have like the ranges where you have the burners on top, electric or gas, plus the oven. So, you could have, depending on which one it is, but talking about just regular ovens, if it's tripping the breaker, it'll typically do it pretty fast once you turn it on. Because once you turn it on, whether you're doing a bake, a broil, a convection, essentially on the main power or relay board, it turns on a relay, which is basically just a power switch that allows the electricity to go to whatever element that you want it to. It will either be the relay board that's causing that, once it's shorted somewhere, or it'll actually be the heating element that's shorted. So what usually happens when it's tripping is on the back of your heating element there are two terminals that the wires from the relay board connect to. When you have an issue and you have a short, sometimes it can basically kind of pop off that terminal to where your wires just kind of hanging loose back there. So every time you turn your oven on, instead of sending power to the element, it's basically touching the cavity of the oven, so it'll ground out instantly and trip the breaker. So a lot of times just a visual inspection of the back and all of the wires will give you the answer as far as what's causing it. And if you're familiar and comfortable with repairing the wire and putting a new terminal on it, we're talking about a 10-cent part and 20 minutes. So that's really the best case scenario for tripping the breaker.
Yeah, good to know, and good to know what to check as well. And yeah, just to preface all of the troubleshooting stuff generally, even with a built-in oven, although it looks like something that should never be moved, you take a couple of screws out the sides and it'll come right out. They're not too heavy, maybe one a second person if you need, and then yeah, you're just opening up the back and all the wires are right there.
And one thing you want to check too, there is a great piece of equipment that all technicians just absolutely love and you got to have, which is called an oven dolly or an appliance dolly. You can really use it for a lot of things, but it's basically it's got four wheels. It just kind of almost looks like metal pipes, and it's got an adjustable base. So you roll it right up to your oven, you adjust it to the height, and then you lock it in place, and you can pull your oven right out on it, dolly it around. I'm not sure how much those go for, but especially if you live in like a bigger city and you have some, appliance parts places near you, you may call around and see if you could rent that, especially if you have a big heavy double oven. And trust me, if it's like maybe $50 to rent it for the day, it is completely worth it.
Yeah, I can imagine that can be massively helpful when it's a big one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so moving on then, what if the oven tends to make a clicking noise? I'm getting this from people searching this, so it could just be, maybe we touch on the heat going onto the metal expanding, that type of thing, or potentially maybe more of an electrical noise.
Yeah, for sure. So definitely with the clicking, the metal inside the cavity heating and cooling, especially if it's kind of like a quieter clicking. And you could almost imagine like when you've been driving for a long time and you get out of your car sometimes, you'll hear that. If it's similar to that, that's really nothing to worry about. That's fine. Some are a little worse than others. It just depends on, how they manufacture it as far as the thickness of the metal, everything used. If you hear more of a kind of a sharp, louder clicking, one thing that it could be is if your oven has a self-clean option, it means it has a door lock. If your oven does not have a self-clean option, it won't have a door lock. Most door locks nowadays are basically a little motor that spins in a circle and has a hook on the outside. The other function of that lock is it has switches on it that tells the control board what position it's in. So that's why when you do a self-clean, you'll hear kind of a buzz, you'll hear a click, and then it'll display that it's locked. So when those go bad sometimes, it doesn't know what position it's in. And so it may just keep slowly spinning, trying to find out. You will typically get an error code with it, but if it sounds like it's coming from there and you put your ear up to where that little latch is sticking out, then most likely it's going to be that door lock that's causing that clicking. If you hear a loud clicking and it almost sounds like a fan, maybe that's hitting something, if it's a really fast clicking like that, most ovens have a cooling fan. And the purpose of this is to take the hot air in between the cavity or above the cavity where your sensitive electronics are mounted, and to push that hot air out. So it's not pulling air from inside the cavity, it's just outside from the back, from everywhere else, venting it out. Those do go bad. That's a semi-common issue. Most of the time, it's really just an annoyance as far as noise. If you're not getting any error codes, your oven isn't shutting down because it's getting too hot, and you don't mind living with it, that may be an option, because for a technician to come out and repair that between parts and labor, it starts at $400. Depending on the difficulty, up to $600 to $700, depending on the price of the fan. That repair, if you could find a YouTube video of a similar model of yours, some of them are fairly simple. Some of them, you pull the oven out, you take 10 screws, the back cover comes off, the fan's right there, 4 more screws and you can change it. Some are a lot more complicated on how they've installed them. So you have to get your eyes on that and see if it's something you're comfortable with if you're doing that yourself.
Yeah, definitely good to sort of to classify this as one of those. It's fine, live with it. It's just going to be annoying, or you can go into looking at repairs and things. And just to touch on if it is the self cleaning door motor as well, is that quite complicated to access in general?
So that's another one where it depends. On some ovens, it's literally you'll see the screws right there in the front. You open the door and 2 screws, the thing just pulls out. The wires are long enough you could change it. And some of them, you've got to remove the whole oven. You've got to remove a few covers. You've got to set aside wiring harnesses. Some of them are a nightmare. So it's really just a roll of the dice on which one you're going to have. So again, if you could find a video, something similar, or even pull it out, take the top cover off and look and see if it's right there, then it's an easy repair if you can get to it easily.
Yeah, yeah. Definitely worth knowing. I guess that explains the mysterious clicking noise. Moving on would be if the oven's temperature just can't really hold steady, or if it keeps changing the temperature, what would you look at for that?
That's a really, really common deal. It's just, it doesn't seem to be cooking right. So the best thing that I recommend is to find the probe we were talking about earlier that's sticking out of the oven, and take your rack, and they're typically mounted near the top. And so you would take your rack and put it on the very top option, and then buy one of those thermometers that you could leave in the oven. Typically it's the one, if you go to your grandma's house, you'll see it in her oven, kind of the circle, and it's got the dial that moves as it heats up. Get that and put it on the rack as close to the thermometer as you can. Set your oven at 350 and let it bake for an hour without opening the door. After about an hour, open the door and look and see where that gauge is at. And that's going to tell you what your average temperature is. It's going to, tell you if your variance is okay. The reason that you want to do that is because basically those thermometers adjust slowly, and after an hour, you're going to have basically your steady set temperature. And so you'll find, say you open it and it's at 320 instead of 350, or 380 instead of 350, then you're going to kind of know where to start. And at that point, you would want to go into your owner's manual or look online to see how to access the temperature adjustment on the oven. A lot of times it's something simple. Some of the newer ones, you could there's a settings button on the control panel, and that's one of the options. Some of the other ones that are a little more basic, you've got to hold like bake and broil at the same time for 10 seconds. You've got to press bake, go to max temperature, hold bake for 10 seconds. It's something like that. But when you get into the temperature adjustment menu, you'll see 2 zeros, and that means that it's not adjusted plus or minus. You can usually adjust the temperature plus or minus 30 degrees usually. And so if you do your test after an hour, it says it's 320, you're going to want to get in your temperature adjustment and adjust it plus 30. If it says it's 380 on the temperature gauge, you want to do it minus 30 and then save it. Again, all that's in the manual. And a lot of times that'll fix it. It's basically just kind of recalibrating the oven.
Yeah. As a sort of frame on mind, it's the temperature adjustment that you want to increase or decrease, rather than you're saying it's negative or like it's 32 low or something like that. Adding to what it is rather than telling it how low, how much it's missing by.
Right, yeah. You're basically, it's saying, you say, hey, I've set you at 350, but you're really 320, but it thinks it's 350. So you basically tell it like, okay, here is 350. This is what's accurate by increasing or decreasing. So what can happen too with the it's not cooking right is they'll say, it comes on, it gets hot, it seems like it's working, but it takes an hour to cook, and I've got to turn it off and turn it on. So what happens in those cases is you almost always at least have a bake and a broil element. Most ovens nowadays, when you turn it on, you'll see that it's preheating. And so what happens during preheat is a lot of times it will cycle all of the elements inside, the bake, the broil, the convection, so that it can preheat faster. When your bake element is out, it doesn't know that. So it's preheating, it tries to turn the bake element on, nothing happens. It turns the broil element on, it gets hot, it turns the convection, it goes back to the bake. So you'll notice it takes a little longer to preheat, and then after that, it doesn't heat at all because the bake element doesn't get activated because you're baking and not broiling. And so if that happens, I mean, 99% of the time it's going to be your bake element.
Okay, so it's almost always the bake, not not one of the other two.
Right, yeah, because the all the other ones are working during preheat. After preheat, you don't want the broil on if you're trying to bake, so it's just going to do the bake. And the same thing works with a gas oven. Is not so much. It doesn't so much cycle like a broil and gas, but when you have a weak igniter, what can happen is it'll come on the first time, and then after it gets a temperature and preheats, that igniter, it'll glow and try to come on, but it won't activate the gas anymore. And so that means your igniter's getting weak and you have to change it.
Okay, yeah, good to know. Is it ever common that maybe the heat has started to leak out? Like I don't know if perhaps the doors, maybe the gasket's kind of a bit damaged or something like that, and that's what could have caused the sort of the temperature change over like a longer time span, something like that.
So even if the gasket's bad, there shouldn't be enough of a temperature loss that would really affect the cooking that much, because on a really good expensive oven, a damaged gasket would still hold temperature better than a cheap oven with a good gasket. You know what I mean? But sometimes it can be concerning. You can have an issue with the gasket if you get close and you just feel a lot of heat coming out of the door. And what that can do is discolor the outside of the oven. You know, if it comes up, it could discolor the control panel, the door handle. So that would be something you would want to get fixed. And replacing a door gasket is super easy. It just pulls out and a new one just pops in. So
Nice, yeah. Probably one of the simplest replacements on the whole thing.
oh yeah.
Yeah.
Or the light bulb. I'd say those two would be my favorite two repairs. So
Nice. Well, that's actually on my list. If the light bulb's not working, you're cooking in the dark. Is that pretty much always just just access from the inside, I guess, most of the time?
yes, yeah. Fortunately, and it's not like the microwave fiasco with changing some of
Yeah.
those. So it is always accessible from the inside. Again, consult your owner's manual, especially if it's an LED type bulb, because obviously you can't just go down to Lowe's and get one of those. You've probably got to order it. But they should have the number in the owner's manual. Sometimes the cover for them can be a little confusing on how to remove. You know, some of them have a bar that pops off, some of them screw off, some of them have a screw. So definitely look at the owner's manual. If you have an oven that just has a regular looking light bulb, but it's a little smaller, those are called appliance bulbs. Those can be got locally from Lowe's and places like that. And if you just get it'll say on the package appliance bulb, and it'll work. So they're all the
Yeah.
same for the ovens with the screw-in bulbs. So
Good to know. Yeah. I guess as a layman, you never really know, or like with microwaves, how it can be an absolute mission compared to most ovens, where it's nice and easy.
oh yeah,
Okay, so just touching back on the temperature issues, if the oven just gets hotter and hotter, it's trying to become, I don't know, the next Mars. What would you look at for that one?
it's kind of ironic because when you say, okay, I mean, my food was burnt to a crisp, like it caught on fire, it was so hot. You think, well, an element or something like that. What it actually is, and I mean, it's really 99 out of 100 times. So when we talked about the relay boards earlier, how it's basically on and off switches that sends power to the element when it needs to heat up, cuts power off whenever it needs to cool down. What people will typically find, they heat up the oven, preheat's done, it beeps, it's ready for food, you put it in. What's happening is one of those relays on the relay power board is stuck shut. So it is constantly sending power to one of the elements, so it never cycles down. What they'll typically do is keep heating up until it actually gets an error code, it's over temperature, and force a shutdown. So that is, again, 99 out of 100 times, you're going to want to replace the relay power board. This can get a little confusing because some ovens have just one main board that is also the power board. These are the type of ovens that are typically like the freestanding ranges where it has the burners on top. It's usually just one board that sends power out. But if you have a built-in oven, especially if it's more of a higher end model, or especially a double oven, you could have not only a main board, but an interface board, a power supply, and two different relay boards. So that
Okay.
part could get really complicated on which one you've got to replace. But, let's say your lower oven is the one doing it. If you are handy, you can pull it out. You can take the top panel off, take the back panel off, and literally follow the wire from the elements on, say, the lower oven, follow it to the board it's plugged into, and a lot of times there'll be a part number on the board. It's a little more work, but it'll definitely save you money. Anybody can change a board. They're easily accessible. They're typically mounted on the back, mounted on the top. Definitely turn the breaker off, use the meter, test the cord where it hooks to the oven, make sure you've got no power, and yeah, do that yourself, because the cost of those power relay boards vary anywhere from $80 to $550. Typically, eBay, Amazon, once you get the correct part number, you can really save a lot of money, especially if you don't want to replace a $1,500 oven. So,
And I'm guessing that could end up being a little bit of an expensive repair as well.
yeah, if you have a technician, especially when they have to pull the oven out, add the markup of cost of parts, in your head, and then the labor. I mean, minimum would be anywhere between $200 to $400. There's some repair outfits that don't use dollies for whatever reason. They just send two guys out there to just manhandle it out of there, and so they're probably going to charge you for two guys. So yeah, the labor can get very expensive on those.
Yeah, I can imagine. So that would be a bit of a harder work one, but definitely doable. And as complex as circuit boards can be, it's good to know that you can replace most of them, with a new model basically, or a
Yeah.
fresher one.
Yeah, and definitely take a picture of it before you start unplugging wires.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big lifesaver. You'll spend more time trying to figure out which one goes where than actually doing the repair. So
Yeah, very good point. I know I'm so thankful for phones that you can kind of get into awkward angles and just take a little picture.
oh yeah,
Yeah, kind of been easy before when you're like, wait, where did that one go in? And
yeah. Before I carried markers in my toolbox, different colored markers, and would mark the wire and then where it goes on the board and use different colors, and then I would do 2 or 3 hatches. And yeah, so looking at some of the old stuff I worked on, you'll just see all kinds of just abstract weird markings on there.
just
So,
coloring in and stuff
oh
like.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, good way to do it though, for sure.
Just one more thing on the temperature probe.
Yeah.
Basically, how that works is as the oven's heating up, because it's a really simple deal. If you look at the back of the temperature probe, it's 2 skinny, tiny little wires into a plastic connector. So what happens is as the oven heats up, the metal of that temperature probe changes, and which means that the resistance of the metal changes. So the control board, where that probe is eventually plugged into, it basically interprets the change in resistance as your temperature. And so that's how it knows what the temperature is inside. So if your probe is damaged, say something spilled and you have a lot of buildup on it and it may not be heating properly, you want to make sure that's clean. You want to get behind it and make sure your wires aren't messed up, nothing's frayed, anything like that. Because even just the smallest bit of variance can greatly affect the temperature. So that, just to explain how that works so people have kind of a better idea of what may be causing an issue because of that.
Right, yeah. And I guess much clearer once you sort of get in there and you can see it for yourself. Well, no, yeah, definitely good footnote to add. What would you look at if you're talking to a homeowner who's got an oven that is cooking really unevenly? Maybe the front is always sort of burning and the back's, pretty lukewarm, or vice versa. Maybe it's on the sides. What would you sort of recommend that they look at?
There's a couple of different things with that, especially if you're baking. The heat's coming from the bottom, and so you want to think about kind of how the heat flows, how it escapes from the oven. It could be a potential gasket issue to where you're having more heat escape from a place that's not supposed to. So you have a majority of that heat that's, coming across instead of evenly coming up, that it's coming out of gaskets, so maybe cooking the front more so than the back. The other thing too is I know sometimes folks will put like a big pan or something on the lower rack to kind of catch everything that falls. And it's good because it's less cleaning, but it could definitely cause some temperature issues, especially if the pan's off-centered, if it's, something's going on with it. A lot of times, it could also just be a temperature issue in general, that it's cooking too hot, it's not cooking hot enough. And I can't remember if we covered that already, but...
Yeah, we touched on when the oven's sort of getting hotter and hotter. So just sort of looking at the thermostat adjustment, I think, or maybe we could cover it again, or touch on what you'd look at for when it's potentially the oven itself just getting way too hot.
Yeah, for sure. So if it's getting too hot, it'll cook the outside quicker than the inside, and that sort of thing. Those are the main things to look at for uneven cooking. Now, if you're getting into like convection cooking, that takes a little finesse. It takes a little practice to get it down. So just depending on where your stuff that you're cooking is located in there, and how the air is going to flow. Most of the time with the ovens that have that convection type cooking, they have some pretty good instructions in the owner's manual. And if you don't have a physical copy, a lot of times, you can go online and get it. But they really kind of break it down and show you how the air flows. So definitely refer to that if you're doing any kind of convection type cooking.
Right. Okay. So essentially, looking in your owner's manual and sort of seeing where the airflow should be, and maybe looking for any blockages, any kind of, yeah, as you say, racks that could be covering it up.
Yeah, and especially if you're cooking, multiple items at the same time.
Yeah.
Most owners' manual, they do have kind of a guide of how to put everything in there. So it's definitely worth checking out. It could potentially save you from having to redo a recipe. So
Yeah, it makes sense. I guess it's sort of like a fridge. It's, you just want to chuck everything in there and forget about it, but really, if you set it up right, it'll help the appliance work a lot better. Is it a fairly common one, the cooking unevenly, that you see, or?
not so much. I think as far as what we typically will get a call on if something's uneven, it's more so that they go to bake a cake and you've got it higher on this side than the other side. Unfortunately, that's just typically a leveling issue.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. You just remind me of my sister who loves to bake, but every so often her oven would just sort of act up, and for my mom's 60th, she baked this absolutely beautiful cake on the outside, but on the inside still, totally raw, raw dough basically.
Oh yeah. Kudos to the bakers. I mean, I
Yeah.
love cooking food. I love trying new recipes, but for some reason, when it comes to baking, it's a nightmare for me. My wife makes these amazing cookies with like part of the ingredients is like a pudding mix,
Mm-hmm.
and they were so good. I thought I would try it one day and surprise her. They literally turn out like little bricks.
Oh
I mean,
no.
like yeah, I'll just stick with cooking regular food.
Yeah,
and
it makes you
really,
appreciate it when she makes them now, I'm sure. Okay, and another one would be if people generally notice smoke coming from the oven. Maybe you open it up and it's not exactly steam that's coming out, it's a little bit of smoke that you're getting
Yeah.
hit with. But what's some common culprits for that one?
That's actually a fairly common issue too. Of course, you see smoke coming from something that gets really hot, it's a concern. You don't want your house burning
Yeah.
down. And fortunately, I would say probably 90% of the time, the issue is going to be just excess buildup inside the oven. Grease, maybe you cook something and a lot of it splattered everywhere. Yeah, most of the time it is just excess buildup. We talked a little bit about the self-clean and everything. So as far as cleaning your oven, you may just, it just may need a wipe down or something not as severe as a self-clean. If you do see smoke, if it's something that is actually a failure in the oven that is cause for concern, it'll definitely have that electric kind of plasticky burny smell. And so yeah, if you see smoke accompanied with that smell, that's when you want to turn the oven off, possibly cut the breaker if that smell doesn't go away, and get somebody out there to take a look at it or take the back off yourself. The good thing about not only ovens or ranges, but most appliances, there's a lot of safety features built into these things. So if you do see smoke, something could potentially short out or even catch fire. It will typically trip your breaker. So it is cause for concern, but your house shouldn't burn down.
Yeah, always good to know, and good to know as well when something's more of a red flag, shut it down, as opposed to, okay, it's a bit smoky, might be, if it's just regular smoke, it might just be that you need a good clean.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and some of them will smoke, man. I mean, especially let's say you replace your own bake element or a broil element,
Yep.
and you first turn it on, you'll just see smoke rolling out of there sometimes. And so you're thinking, oh, did I hook something up wrong? Is it the wrong part? What's going on? The elements, I don't know if it's something that's used when they're making them or some kind of oil that's coating the outside of the element, but when you first turn it on, it's always going to have a decent amount of smoke coming out for 5 to 10 minutes. So definitely not cause for concern there. Just let it run for a little bit. That smoke will dissipate, and it should be good.
Makes sense. So for any new installs, might just have some sort of layering on it. I think it can happen with a few different part replacements in different ways. Just might not even be a smoke, but I guess you put it in and suddenly everything smells a bit weird. But yeah, just sort of the breaking in, I guess.
Yeah. And of course, if it's a brand new oven or range and it starts smoking, most likely you didn't take off all the packing material on the inside, because there's little pieces of foam and all kinds of bits and bobs in there to keep things from moving around when it's being shipped and moved and all that. So definitely open it up, pull the racks out, look real close inside, make sure there's no packing material in there you forgot about. So
Yeah, definitely. What's your kind of general maintenance recommendations for ovens of all types? Just Is there anything you in particular recommend to do every month or 6 months or year, anything like that?
Keeping it decently clean every 6 months or so to clean it out is good in general. As far as a lot of other things, there's really not a lot of upkeep that one can do. I would say probably the type of oven, and in this case it would be a range or a cooktop, is if it's gas. With gas, especially the surface burners, there's a few things that need to happen for it to spark and then light and then keep a good flame. So on most cooktop or gas ranges, you typically have like a burner cap, which is that kind of, just circle looking black thing on there that the flame goes around. Those, I would say 95% of the time, can just be taken off. And then under there, you'll see a thing under the burner cap. It's got a bunch of ridges in there.
Mm-hmm.
And so when the cap's on top of that, as the flame comes up, it goes through all those ridges, and that's kind of how it's evenly spread. Over time, you can have grease build up and food build up, and if some of those ridges are blocked, you'll notice that your flame isn't even. So if you have where part of your flame just isn't coming up,
Mm-hmm.
typically you can just get in there with like a hard bristled brush. It doesn't have to be metal; it could be like a kind of hard plastic brush, and clean it up real good. Down inside the hole is the orifice where the gas actually comes out. And these holes where the gas comes out, I mean, it's super tiny. You can fit a sewing needle in it for the
Right.
most part. And so you can have a single grain of salt get in there and cause it not to even light. So you want to check that and, get a needle, kind of run it in and out of that hole. And then the final thing, on the piece with all the ridges, you'll notice where your little igniter is. Sometimes that can get kind of grease build up, so it's not making contact and sparking to light correctly. And then right beside where that igniter is, there's a little tiny hole. So as the gas comes up through the orifice, it hits the burner cap and then it spreads out. One of the places it goes through this little tiny hole where that igniter is, and then it'll spark and ignite. So if you have any buildup in there, that gas can't get to the igniter, it's going to have a really hard time lighting. So you always want to make sure all that's clean and clear of any debris. And I would say that's pretty good upkeep, and it could definitely save you a service call.
Yeah, definitely. Is there any sort of, I know with sort of microwaves, we've recommended maybe putting like a cup of vinegar in there and stuff to sort of steam that up and help with any removal. Is that good for ovens as well?
Yeah. So a lot of ovens will even have kind of like a flex clean or like a steam clean,
Mm-hmm.
where the bottom cover for the inside cavity of the oven is kind of recessed down a little, and so you can actually fill it up with water and then start a flex clean or a steam clean cycle. So even if you don't have that feature, you can still kind of reproduce it in a way of, getting a large pan with water, getting your oven really hot for say 30 minutes or an hour, and then getting that steam to kind of loosen everything up, and then getting in after and cleaning it. And it's a little bit more of a mess, but it's a lot safer than potentially blowing a fuse on the oven with a self-clean.
Yeah, definitely. Or, pretty much pulling a muscle with the amount of scrubbing it takes when it's dry.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
because when stuff's on there and then you're baking at hundreds of degrees multiple times, yeah,
Yeah.
it's you almost want to get a grinder in there sometimes to get some of that stuff off.
It's a permanent fixture at that point. Unfortunately, they're not quite like cast iron pans where it's almost like, okay, no problem. The more the better.
Yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
And I know a lot of people are tempted sometimes to even put the tinfoil to line the bottom of it, and
Okay.
in most owner's manual, it'll tell you not to do that, because that tinfoil, if it's in there long enough and the oven gets hot enough, it basically fuses with the bottom cavity of the oven,
Wow.
and then it just looks awful. Like, you're not going to get it off. And if
Yeah.
you do get it off, you're taking the paint with it. So it's going to look worse than when before you started. So
Yeah, it just becomes the oven.
yeah,
Yeah.
pretty
Oh,
much. Well, one thing I have had some luck with are those kind of non-stick mats, and they almost seem like kind of a plasticky, rubbery kind of deal. You would figure they would melt, but I personally use one of those,
Mhm.
and it just pulls right out, and the stuff just wipes right off. So those are really good. You may, look at some of the reviews on some of those and pick one. I've had pretty good luck with those.
Fantastic. Yeah, so just non-stick oven mats, basically.
Hmm.
Just to sort of circle back to what we were saying about potential issues with a gas oven, like with the fire, with the flame not spreading, would that generally, so the flame not spreading out evenly and maybe needing a bit of a clean, something potentially lodged in the sort of the gas, I guess, valve, would you call it, where the gas is coming out of?
So where the
Or
gas is coming out, they usually refer to that as the orifice.
the orifice.
Kind of one of those deals where they have a few different names, but that's probably the most common.
Right. And something as well potentially blocking the little igniter sort of cavity. If someone's sort of saying that their gas oven isn't lighting, would you say that that's pretty much going to be the problem
Oh,
most of the time?
almost every time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Cool.
it's a quick, easy fix. There's even some cases where you'll have, say, it's a 5 burner cooktop or a range top, and usually there's at least like 3 or 4 different sizes. Sometimes
Hmm.
two of the burners are the same size. But if you take everything off to clean it, and then you put them back on and you find it's not lighting,
Hmm.
most likely you accidentally switched one of the caps, because they're all, some of them are close to size, but you could definitely put the wrong one on the wrong cap, and then it won't light because it's not going to spread the gas correctly.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. I think I've done that before.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
that's
yeah,
I've had a
that
few of those calls.
yeah, I can imagine. That, or I guess if you're cleaning and something gets in the thing as you're cleaning it, you sort of end up causing your own problem. The other one from a gas oven that I have as a common complaint would be if you're smelling gas from the oven. Obviously, the oven might be on, but you're still smelling it in your kitchen. Is that essentially another red alert, just shut everything down type deal?
It definitely could be, yeah, especially if you've never had gas before. You know, you smell a little bit, and it's like, oh, my house is gonna blow up. You know,
Yeah.
some of it is normal to smell a little bit sometimes, especially if instead of natural gas you have propane, because
Hmm.
propane is just a whole lot stinkier. But if it really does smell like it is in excess, usually that does mean that your bake igniter is defective. So the way it's supposed to work is when you turn it on to cook, it sends power to the igniter, which then heats up. Once it gets hot enough, it allows the gas valve to open, and it's supposed to ignite it right away. So when you have your bake igniter starting to go out and get worn out, it'll allow the gas through, but it's not quite hot enough to ignite it. So you may have a few seconds, up to 20 seconds, where you've got gas coming in before it ignites, and so that could definitely be an issue.
Yeah. Could be a lot of gas in those 15, 20 seconds, I guess.
Oh yeah, and there when that happens, sometimes they'll say, you know, when it does ignite, the door kind of pops open a little bit 'cause it's like a little mini explosion in
With the
there. So
force, yeah.
bad bake igniter for that. You want to get that changed out.
Yeah, yeah, definitely makes sense. One super probably general one, I don't think we covered this yet, is just in general the oven not heating or not getting up to temperature. I've had that a few times. It's pretty much always just been a busted heating element, which is thankfully quite an easy replacement. Would you say that that's the most common? Is there anything else that could cause that? You know, you put the food in, set the temperature up, and it gets like kind of lukewarm, but just not up there.
Yeah, yeah, you're definitely right. It is typically the heating element or the bake igniter. And the reason that you can have some heat, or even where it'll get up to temperature, it'll preheat, but then it never gets hot again, is because during preheat, it cycles all of the available elements. So your broil element, your convection element, all of it's coming on to cook faster, to heat up. So when it comes time for just the bake to cook, then that's when you lose your temperature. So most often it is definitely the bake element. And with gas, it could even be intermittent. Like, yeah, it'll cook, but it takes an extra hour because it's not igniting every time that it should when it cycles. Yeah, that's definitely the most common. If you have a convection feature on your oven, one way to really know that it's your bake element is, instead of just choosing to bake, select a convection cook feature and then cook your food. And if that works and everything's fine, then you know for sure you've got a bad bake element.
Yeah, makes sense. You were saying on the gas, yeah, I personally didn't realize, and I'm sure a lot of other people also don't realize, but the gas oven's cycling on and off as it cooks. So, yeah, it might appear to be fine on the first one, but then I guess, you know, further down the line, something's missing, or it's maybe not lighting fully or evenly. So good to know. And I guess for that, you can sort of just keep checking your gas oven and seeing if the flames are all there properly.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And that is really a pretty common issue when a bake igniter goes out. It does typically kind of get worn out, so it's intermittent before it fully goes out a lot of times. So,
Hmm.
yeah, if you've definitely noticed that it's pretty inconsistent results with your gas oven, what it seems like is they'll typically last, the bake igniters, if you do a lot of cooking, I would say, you know, 3 to 6 years is kind of like an average time where they start to get kind of worn out. So,
Right. Yeah. And personally, having replaced a few heating elements in the electric convection ovens, found it pretty easy. Would you say that most other elements for most ovens are similarly easy replacements in terms of just getting in there, unscrewing one, screwing the other back in?
for the most part, it is the majority of them. When you start to get into like the hidden bake elements, some of those can be difficult, and sometimes because you can get to the element through the front, you open the door, take off the door, make it even easier. It's usually just 2 screws, the element pulls out, the wires are long enough, you change it, no problem. But every once in a while, they'll make it to where those wires aren't long enough, where you can't pull the thing out, and then
Yeah.
that's when you curse at the engineer that designed it that way and have to pull the whole thing out. So,
Yeah, which I guess can vary drastically on based on model how easy the pulling out part is.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially if it's a built-in oven,
Oof,
a
yeah.
built-in double oven. You're talking a super heavy item, and if you don't have any kind of like structure to pull it out on or any kind of dolly type thing, it's
That's a workout.
oh gosh, yeah, it's a nightmare.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes you'll pull the element out and be real careful when you're pulling the element out. Of course, cut the breaker off and everything, but you'll kind of undo the screws and you'll kind of gently jiggle it out because if it's a tight wire connection, you don't want it to come unplugged and you've got to get behind there.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you'll only have a few inches of wire. And so you'll go to take off one wire, take off the other one, and then it gets pulled back in.
Mm-hmm.
So what I always do is I have like a clamp with like a wire on it. And so once I pull it out, I'll clamp each wire in the back. That way, if it gets pulled in, I can just gently pull it back out. So it's a step that takes an extra minute or two, but it could save you an hour or two.
Absolutely, yeah. I've had that happen to me, and then you're going fishing within the insulation to find this little wire. It's like,
Oh yeah, yeah, using like hooks and everything, trying
Yeah.
to get in there. Oh yeah,
It's
it's a
brutal, yeah.
nightmare.
It's the worst game of hide and seek I've ever played.
Oh goodness, yeah.
And yeah, so one of the final ones in terms of functionality for oven issues is just if your oven keeps turning off or cutting out, which I guess could be similar to some of the other things we've spoken about. But yeah, if that's the main complaint, what would you look at there?
So if it's cutting out in the sense where like the control and the display and everything is turning off and on, if you can access it, you want to just get in there and just make sure all the connections are nice and tight on the control. You may have to determine if the control itself is shorting out or if you're intermittently losing power. So that may be a little difficult to determine. At that point, you would kind of have to put a meter on it, turn the power back onto it, which, if you're not experienced with doing that sort of thing, that could be dangerous. So at that point, if it's not something obvious, then you may want to get a technician out to verify.
Gotcha.
I would say a technician or an electrician, whichever may be the cheaper service call, because it's going to be a coin toss, whether it's the oven or whether it's the household power.
Yeah, and is there any sort of, I guess it depends on the outlet, sort of putting something else into the outlet to see how that performs over some time?
The built-in ovens are wired directly from the household power to the oven. If it's like a freestanding range where you just pull it away from the wall, that is a specific 220 volt dedicated plug. So unfortunately you can't really plug anything else into it because nothing will really fit there. It would probably be easier to determine on a range while it's plugged in and you pull the unit out. If you see it cutting on and off as you're pulling it out, then most likely it's going to be a power cord or a plug issue.
Right. What if, in terms of cutting out or turning off, it's the power stays on, but it seems to be, and I guess similar to before, is it's maybe getting up to temperature and then stopping. Power's still on, but it's, yeah, just sort of canceling the cooking, I guess.
Yeah, I think it would go back to the bake element. And in that case, that's where you would try a convection cook. If you don't have convection cook, you might even try a broil and see if that cooks effectively. Because if the broil is cutting out as well, then it'll definitely be an issue with the control board.
And control board's pretty tricky to get to.
Yeah, that one's kind of a coin toss too. Typically, if it's
Yep.
a freestanding range, they're pretty simple to get to. It's like eight screws to remove the back and then 4 to remove the control. But then yeah, if it's like a built-in oven or especially a double oven, that's when you get into having to pull the whole unit out. And it could be a control board, it could be a power relay board. The ovens are definitely a little more tricky, typically.
Good to know. What if someone keeps reporting of an oven that's like always beeping or the alarm keeps going off? Is that generally just sort of a faulty circuit board as well, do you think? Or control board, rather?
Usually, especially if there's like an audible alarm, it's usually the interface. On most freestanding ranges, the interface is part of the control board. But especially on your more expensive ones, and if it's got like a whole like kind of touch interface type of deal, that typically is a separate part. but most of the time when you have that issue, it is the interface. And so you want to determine if that's a standalone part or if it's part of the control board.
And what would you sort of do in each case? Is it, would you go ahead and just probably assume that we need to replace the interface, or would potentially just like giving it a good scrub, a good clean down, maybe trying to reset the breaker a little bit? What would you sort of expect to be the fix, I guess?
It typically is a pretty dainty connection that connects the interface to the control board.
Mhm.
So definitely, take it out, inspect it, see if everything looks good. Sometimes it's a regular connection that kind of snaps and locks into place. Sometimes it's that ribbon cable that we've talked about before, where it's just a super thin deal and it kind of goes in this holder and locks into place. That you can take some rubbing alcohol, clean it off, dry it, make sure it's good to go. And there is a decent chance that could fix it, especially if it's an intermittent issue where you're getting that alarm. Definitely check that connection between the two and just see if everything's good, see if it's nice and clean and tight.
Gotcha, yeah. So I guess if you are out there suffering from a beeping oven or a beeping alarm on your oven, probably the first step, I guess, would be trying to find your user manual to sort of see what kind of interface you have. Yeah, just going from there, seeing if you can access the control board or the interface and the small
Right.
connection that goes to it.
Yeah, totally understandable. I mean, again, it's one of those deals where there's 3 different names to just
Yeah.
about every single part. So it's
I think that's about it, actually, for in terms of general troubleshooting. Is there anything that comes to mind that people will generally give you a call for?
I do get a lot of complaints where people will have an immaculate kitchen. You can eat off the floor. The oven is amazing. It looks brand new. But they have where the drips are going down inside of the door glass. They may be tempted to try to get in there and clean it.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time getting into the door, it's so many pieces. It's amazing. I mean, there's up to 4 different pieces of glass.
Wow.
There's brackets that hold things in place that are just kind of sitting there in the position. It can be very, very difficult. And then once you put it all back together, you run the risk of the front glass shattering because it's safety glass. Mm-hmm. So if everything isn't perfectly aligned, you'll go to turn in that last screw and it just shatters. I don't recommend having it taken apart, and you want to be leery even if you have a tech come out and do it. Some of them probably won't do it just because of the risk of that breaking and then being liable. Mm-hmm. And if they do, you're thinking, oh, well, they'll come out, take it apart and clean it, maybe $100 or $200. But I mean, there's some, depending on the door, you may pay $300 or $400 in labor just for them to clean it. So
just to clean a door, yeah.
Yeah. So there are some things you can do. Most doors will have some kind of vent or some kind of hole somewhere on it where you can actually get something that's pretty stiff but kind of flexible, even like a coat hanger, and then tape some type of like microfiber cloth or something to it, and you can run it in the hole if it's small enough to try to clean it up a bit. You may have to kind of play with what you're using, but I would definitely recommend that rather than trying to get in there.
Yeah, and definitely just praying that the microfiber cloth doesn't come off the hook, and then
Yeah, exactly.
you're playing the arcade fishing game, trying to get it back.
Yeah, for real. It's a thing.
I'm sure there's someone out there with a perfectly clean kitchen and an oven door that's just got that one few little blemishes that's just driving them crazy. But I mean, $400 is a lot to fix it.
Oh yeah, and there's just some designs are better than others at that not happening, because when you have that much heat and you're cooking and you've got grease, from the stuff that's cooking, it's hard for it not to, as that heat and all that moisture is venting out, for it not to go in between the glass. So yeah, some are definitely better than others on that happening.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. And yeah, I guess one last point to touch on, which is something I used to think with ovens, but I've realized it's not really the case, is you don't need to be super scared of opening the door and sort of all the hot air coming out, just because everything inside it is so hot it'll recover quite quickly. So obviously, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, of course, but it's not going to put everything back to zero, the second you open the door a little bit. It's okay if you need to adjust things and stuff. It's just something it was mainly my mom always used to get so strict about, but yeah, generally, I don't think it's too long of a temperature drop when you open the door.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, everything is super hot in there, and so you will kind of, as far as like the cavity inside air temperature, If you open it up, check something, move something around, and shut it, you may lose maybe about 30 degrees or so. But yeah, it heats up fast. It's not going to mess anything up for sure.
Yeah, and definitely heats up a lot quicker than, when you're preheating and stuff and everything's stone cold from the start. We could touch on the broil element just if that's not working, but I imagine it's pretty much always just going to need a replacement, or it's cheap enough to just replace and see if that fixes it. Are
Yeah.
those generally the same as the electric convection heating elements in terms of just finding a few screws and disconnecting the wires?
Yeah. Broil element is typically set up like the bake element, where it's just the screws holding it in place, and it'll pull out. Some broil elements have kind of an elaborate kind of bracket system holding them up top, and so you may have an extra screw or two and some kind of bracket holding it in place. But those are pretty simple, like the bake element to change.
Yeah, I think as far as a straight up replacement goes, it's probably one of the most straightforward, I imagine, in terms of just take everything out, just put a new one in, put it all back.
Yeah, pretty much. The thing about the broil too is a lot of ovens now will let you adjust the temperature of the broil. Back in the day, you broiled, it just came on and got just extremely hot.
Yeah.
And so now some of them do have like a low, medium, high setting on the broil,
Mm-hmm.
so it gives you a little bit more control there.
Yeah, got you. And in terms of different brands, I think we touched on it towards the start of the podcast, but yeah, no real brand recommendation in general. It's more just I think you were saying the price range, so you're just wanting to make sure the quality of the parts and the insulation and stuff is good.
Yeah, with ovens and ranges and cooktops, well, not so much cooktops, but with ovens and ranges, you get what you pay for. And so if you're paying for the cheapest oven, it's going to work. It's not going to be totally accurate. You're going to have some spikes in temperature. A lot more heat's going to escape than something a little more expensive. But yeah, that's a comfortable thing with those is pretty much anything in that price range is of similar quality.
Yeah, makes sense. And I guess it's always good for that kind of thing to have an easier buying decision rather than, in-depth comparisons between companies and things. Is there any sort of common mistakes that you see people make that lead to technician call-outs, like maybe leaving a big wide rack on the bottom that's blocking a lot of the heat, anything like that?
Yeah, so that, and then the tinfoil on the bottom.
Yeah.
And okay, so if you have a range or a cooktop that has that flat glass surface, where you can't, the elements are underneath the glass. A lot of people like to cook with cast iron. It's not recommended to have cast iron on that surface. It could definitely crack the glass, and that's a very expensive repair and can be difficult. Some are easy, but in general, just expect it to be a difficult repair. So yeah, don't use cast iron on those glass tops. And also, be aware it is glass. I mean, I don't know if you've seen some of those big, huge cooking pots, almost like something on a cartoon,
Right.
where they're just making, I don't know, a soup for like the whole building or
Whole
something.
neighborhood, yeah.
Yeah, and don't do that on those glass tops either. It can only handle so much weight. And then when you have it get hot, because what's crazy about those, I had one of those little kind of laser temperature guns,
Mm-hmm.
and I pointed the little thing at one of those elements on those glass tops when it gets super red hot, and it was like it read like 900 degrees, or there's just something crazy.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that much heat with that much weight, you're gonna have an accident. So.
Yeah, definitely. Looks fantastic, but just comes with a few disclaimers for
Yeah.
glass ovens or glass cooktops.
Yeah, exactly. And when you're designing your kitchen and you're putting all your accessories and like making it look nice, those things that are hanging where you can put your pots and pans and hang it up, and it looks real pretty sometimes, but if you've got a glass top, don't put it over it, because you will accidentally drop one of those at some point and crack your cooktop. So
Yeah, you're at the end of the day working on top of a window almost. A
Yeah.
lot sturdier than that, but not too much sturdier.
if it's just a drop-in cooktop, you want to make sure, like, let's say you're replacing your old one, and your old one's like a metal cooktop, with the coil type elements. It's just real old school. When you put in the new one, you want to make sure that the space around the opening is kind of nice and level.
Mm-hmm.
That there's not any debris. Sometimes if you have like a tile type countertop, if it's too uneven, when you drop down in your new cooktop, because that glass is going to be resting on that surface, if it's too uneven, it will eventually crack. It may not at first, But yeah, as it settles in, as it gets hot and cool and hot and cool, and then you got weight on it from cooking, it'll crack. There are some options, like you can get, some type of gasket, or even like a silicone type gasket,
Hmm.
and put it around there so that it kind of seals on that, and you've got a little bit of play there without it
Yeah.
cracking. The only
Smart.
downside of that is when a tech has to take it out to work on it, he's got to cut the gasket, and that's kind of annoying. But that's on them. You're paying them to do that anyway, so it's fine.
Yeah, it's a good solution as well, just to have that little bit of tolerance to
Hmm.
avoid it. Yeah, definitely worth knowing. I did also rediscover something, which is just if someone may have been an oven that's been installed for a while, or they've just been putting in a new oven, but if you just find that it's too deep and it's sticking out and not flush from the counter, I take it there's pretty much no solution. I've just seen a few people having that issue, and it's is there anything that you can do about that, or is it pretty much just you might want to take it back and get a shallower oven?
As far as sticking away from the wall, sometimes there is something you can do. So, depending on how the cord is, that may actually be preventing you from pushing it back all the way. If it's a freestanding range, you can actually pull that drawer out underneath, just pull it out all the way, and look underneath, and you can actually see how that cord is wrapped around. And sometimes you could even see the plug right there. So, it may be as simple as just getting under there, adjusting the cord, and then pushing it back a little further. And then, as far as I've seen it also where there's a big gap in between the counter on either side and the range in between. They do make some covers and stuff that you could cut to length and put in there that at least prevent a bunch of stuff from spilling on either side. And then, of course, if it's sticking too far above the countertop, they do have feet adjustments. So you just want to make sure that your feet aren't adjusted super high.
Yeah, so it could potentially be an easy fix, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess if it is like jutting into the outlet or the a cord issue, maybe one way to tell is that, if you push it back flat, it gets stuck, but maybe you can kind of push it in one way or the other way, and it's sort of signifying that there's something blocking only one side, which means you could probably remove that, as opposed to if it's just flat on the wall,
Yeah.
then yeah, there's not much you can do.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, cool, good to know. And I guess that about wraps us up.
Think so. Oh, okay, okay. Another little random bit.
Uh-huh.
Some ranges with the cooktop, it's typically the glass top ranges. If you have, and I think we touched on it a little bit, where it's like a dual element. So you have kind of like an inner or an inner plus outer if you want kind of a larger deal. Most of the time, that selection is on the switch. But every once in a while, especially the ones that are lesser expensive, it's an actual toggle switch on the panel somewhere that'll
Right.
actually let you select if you want just the inner smaller element or if you want the whole larger element.
Mm-hmm.
It's a toggle switch. So, say you move in somewhere and it's an older one and it's faded and there's a switch there and you never knew what it was, and you
Yeah.
also don't know why this element isn't coming on all the way, you may want to push that switch because that may be the only problem.
Yeah, definitely. Or I guess sometimes it can even be the way that you push down the igniter, or something on the controls that determines which one of the bigger or smaller ones come on. We used to have something like that, and it's just like you had to kind of know the trick to be able to get it.
Oh yeah, yeah. Especially if stuff's faded and you don't really know, you're just gonna kind of guess
Yeah,
and figure it
yeah.
out. So.
You can't. Yeah, there's no instructions left anymore, or sort of directions.
Another thing is every oven cooks different, and so there's folks, especially people who bake, who have been making their pie the same way for 30 years, same time, same temperature. They get a brand new oven, and it is just coming out wrong every single time.
Hmm.
There's probably nothing wrong with the oven. You're just gonna have to get used to how this one in particular is cooking. Yeah,
Makes
so.
sense. And I guess for that, maybe you could look at measuring it with a thermostat, but it could be even the new oven is spot on accurate, and the old oven was actually slightly off, and now you got to figure
Right.
out how off it was, how
Right.
off was it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But yeah, you're right with that thermostat deal. I mean, that's really the best way to tell.
I guess that about wraps up the conversation for ovens.
I think so. Yeah, there's always some random little bits that we've seen out in the field, but yeah, I think that's all that's coming to mind right now. So,
Yeah, no, good stuff. And I'm sure we can always do sort of bonus random episodes as well.
like, I know there's just so many like odd, crazy symptoms that ends up being just something you totally wouldn't expect, and
Yeah.
so we'll have to do one where we just pick out like some crazy scenarios and stories
Yeah,
that
definitely
we could
love that.
find of, and then kind of maybe go into depth on, what it ended up being and stuff. That'd be kind of a fun deal.
Yeah, that would be cool. Sort of play along with the appliance detective or something.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
would,
yeah.
yeah. Well, sounds good. But yeah, I guess that wraps us up for this one. So I hope
Yep.
with that we've helped you with your oven issue if you've been having one. And make sure to check out the Appliance Analyst website. And hopefully, whatever issue you're facing, or if you just want to learn a bit more about how to use your appliances better, we'll be able to help you out. Yeah, thank you very much,
Awesome.
and see you soon.